Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new mini-series here on the channel. For a few episodes, we are going to be building Pripyat in 1986, as well as, of course, what you see on screen here, Chernobyl. So, I want to focus more so for this mini-series on the actual town of Pripyat, right down the way from this power plant, since, we've all seen pictures, I'm sure, of Chernobyl, of course, after the disaster and what it's like now. There was recently, or fairly recently, HBO put out their own mini-series on Chernobyl and the disaster there and all the incompetence, frankly, of the workers there and how it was far worse than it ever should have been. But there's not too many pictures and videos of Chernobyl, but also of Pripyat, because it makes sense, that there wouldn't be too many pictures of Chernobyl prior to the disaster, considering it's this massive power plant in the Soviet Union. Information was already not super free back then in the Soviet Union, but it's still a security risk. You don't want to be taking a ton of pictures of this massive nuclear power plant when people could use that for all sorts of things, of course. I know some countries on Google Maps, I think France might be one of them, but there's plenty more, obviously, where if you go on Google Maps or Google Earth, the power plants are shaded out on the on the Google Maps, so you can't actually see. You see just a big blur where the power plant is, but no details. And that's, of course, just for safety and security. So it makes sense, no pictures of Chernobyl prior to the disaster. But with Pripyat, you would think there'd at least be some from the actual people that would live there. And there certainly are some pictures and, the videos that I included in the intro to this new miniseries. So obviously there's some of those, but there's still not that many. And we've all seen plenty of post-disaster Chernobyl and Pripyat. So I wanted to just change it up and see what the city and the nuclear plant here would have been like prior to the disaster. And because, they were just, of course, normal people living their daily lives, hardworking, of course. The entire town of Pripyat was basically just to serve as, the homes for the workers of of Chernobyl and all the families who live in Pripyat. So I just want to try and recreate mostly Pripyat. So for this episode here, we're going to be just building Chernobyl, since it is obviously very important to the whole area. As I just said, there wouldn't be a Pripyat if there weren't Chernobyl. But so this episode is just going to be the power plant, since it is very large, and I did a lot of detailing around the power plant off screen or off camera, like particularly the landscape of the cooling ponds, basically that lead up to the power plant, because there's this man-made lake which just serves as the cooling pond for the power plant, which they built right along the Pripyat River, which of course is what the city Pripyat was named after. But so the map I'm using was already on the workshop, is a Pripyat Chernobyl map. I think it was to scale, but it's still very, very large. So I kind of scaled it down a bit because I just had to, considering this massive scale of the plant in the city. But also, I need to kind of do this in, a few episodes, not, more. I'm aiming for, I think, 3 episodes. I think 1 for this, and then the next episode I'll finish off a few parts of the power plant outside of this main part here, and then I'll work on the city of Pripyat, and then the last episode will also be just finishing off the town of Pripyat. But so for preparing for this mini-series, there's actually a good amount of resources online of maps, like what stuff is, where it was located. Because looking at Google Maps and Google Earth, the quality of the pictures is decent, not anywhere near major cities in Europe or, in the US, where you can actually have 3D images and stuff. Or not 3D images, but like how it renders the cities in 3D. But yeah, so considering that they're not like the super good images on Google Maps, there's a lot of things you have to really, you can't really tell what the heck something is. And of course, a lot of it is overgrown with plants, vegetation, because, it's been abandoned for some time now. But also just the buildings are falling apart, some of them. Although, I mean, contrary to, what most people would assume and what I assumed as well, the power plant was actually functional for quite a while after the meltdown in the fourth reactor. So the main building here that I placed in the very beginning, which I should mention, has some issues. At certain angles, you'll see it disappears there. It's not an issue when recording cinematics, so believe me, it's not going to be flickering, in and out or anything like that. It's perfectly fine. It's just a couple angles at a couple different heights. It just disappears. Also, the LOD is kind of crap, but it's fine. I mean, you have to get pretty far away to see the LOD, so I don't think that'll be an issue either. I mean, I considered building the power plant, just as with modular buildings, more or less, just throwing together a bunch of crap, trying to make sure it looks all right. But I figured that's a lot of work, and it probably wouldn't look good considering there's an actual building on the workshop, which is the actual Chernobyl power plant. You just have to deal with, of course, the couple angles where the building disappears. But anyways, as I was saying, so the meltdown, of course, was in the fourth reactor. That is towards the left side of the power plant. Just looking at the screen here, it's on the left end. And there were 3 other reactors within this building here, and all 3 actually continued to function for some time after. For actually until the last one, number 3 in 2000, was what actually ceased to be functional. So, for 14 years, there was at least one functional reactor working, which, I figured this entire area was off limits, of course, radiation all over the place, which, yes, that's obviously true. But immediately after the disaster, the engineers in the area built what's considered the sarcophagus for the fourth reactor, and that was to keep the radiation particles from escaping, and that contained the radiation quite well. And then I think it was in 2017 is when engineers added an additional protection, which is what you see now. If you go on Google Maps, you'll see this like little dome, more or less, that's over the one side of the reactor. And that was just because the original sarcophagus that was built to contain the radiation was falling apart, so they needed to, build something else to prevent the radiation from spreading. But anyways, there are also 2 additional reactors which were never actually completed. They were under construction at the time in 1986, and they were canceled, pretty much a couple years after, I believe. So they still stand outside of this main area here, just uncompleted. And also there's a couple cooling towers, like the more traditional, I guess when I think of a nuclear power plant, I think those really massive cooling towers that stand so tall and, kind of look a little ominous and scary, but it's just steam. So, but 2 of those were being built as well, but one was mostly built or completely built. I'm not entirely sure, at least just based on Google Maps and looking at it. And then the other one was basically just getting started. So so the cooling towers and then the 2 other reactors that were under construction is probably what I'll focus on building in the next episode until I move on to building the town of Pripyat. So yeah, probably that, or not probably, definitely that, but I'm not sure what else with the power plant, because there's a lot of space here to say the least. But of course, since this was functional prior to the disaster, there wasn't going to be a ton of just grasses and trees just growing all over the place. So even though there's a lot of empty space of just grass and dirt, I had to make it look fairly upkept, which is definitely probably the most difficult thing in this game, trying to make something look still like grass and wild enough that it's not like maintained, every day or something like that. But of course, it's not derelict condition, falling apart. So that's something that's kind of hard to do in this game. But I found, which I guess fortunately, I found this theme on the workshop, which I'm forgetting what it's called. But basically, for the oil texture, the ore texture, and the sand texture, or at least for the oil, and I'll start with the oil and the ore. But it uses like basically an aerial photo of, I don't know, just some landscape as the actual textures. So depending on if you use the theme mixer 2.0 or whatever it's called, if you use that mod, you can adjust basically how zoomed in, or you can scale the theme. So if you want the gravel to have big rocks, you can zoom it out so the gravel texture is larger. But then of course with that, it gets blurry, so that's an issue. Or you can zoom it in so the texture gets smaller. But then with that, depending on the actual texture, you can actually see all the where it's repeating, which can be worse than just being too zoomed in. So for the oil and ore texture, basically I zoomed it in really far until it's it's not meant to be viewed up close, basically. So at least for the one texture, yeah, it's kind of hard to actually explain this because it's not actually on screen, and I'm kind of just rambling on. But you'll see it in the cinematics for sure, and I probably should have included some of it in the episode because it's a really cool idea, whoever created that theme, to use like an aerial shot of a piece of landscape for the theme, because you get like all the rivers and ravines and hills and stuff in the texture. And if you're from if you're not too close, it actually looks like it's 3D. It actually looks like there's little hills and little valleys, kind of, it's all pretty small, so don't think it's like it looks weird or anything. But yeah, it's still cool nonetheless. So you will see me use one of those textures. I forget which one is which, but one of those textures to try and fill in just all this empty space out here. Because like when it comes to like placing all these buildings, I found one website that shows the nuclear plant, all the buildings, and what they actually were. So I mean, like for instance, what I'm building right now, those 6 little circular things on the ground, those are liquid waste tanks for the cooling water. They're actually underground, but I figured it made sense to raise them slightly above ground just so you can see them, and I think it looks much better that way. And yeah, so basically I could, if I wanted to in this video, just say what every single building is, but I figure that's a bit too much because I don't know what a nitrogen oxygen station is or what it does, but I built it, so that's cool, I guess. But anyways, as I was saying, I tried to place these buildings in the exact location and hook up the pipes where the pipes were and the different sized ones. Like these here, these smaller white pipes that I've put across, or will put across a lot of this, a lot of the area of the power plant. A lot of them were actually like layered, because these are just, just 2 little pipes, probably one going one way, one going the opposite direction, whatever's inside. But at the actual plant, there was like multiple lined up. So I tried doing that, like just lining up, just parallel side by side, to try and make it look like there's like 6 pipes or something like that. But I don't know, it just looked kind of weird, so I ended up doing that. But that's not too big of a deal, because once it's once everything is finished, we're only about halfway through the episode. It's another pretty long episode, but once we detail everything here, throw down grasses, here's the one texture there, and that's the actual sand texture, which you can see parts, like see where it's kind of darker for the sand texture compared to just that gravelly looking texture. If you use that sand texture, like the bigger you make it, it gets like this dark muddy looking texture in the center part. And the actual sandy looking part it actually uses the ruin texture, which is really cool. I didn't know. I mean, I guess sand does use like the ruin texture on the border, on the outline of the sand, but this particular theme for the sand, it uses the ruined texture and it makes it really thick and actually looks as if it's a part of the actual theme. So that's pretty cool. But anyways, I'm finally beginning some of the detailing, which, you know, trying to throw down some grass and bushes to fill in all these empty areas, because I couldn't just use, you know, the sand texture or dirt or decals. It just looked way too plain and just boring. And for such a large area, like I said already, I had to use some plants. I didn't want to use too many because it would have been kept enough that stuff wouldn't be growing all over the place. But I like that I'm able to use some more modern props again. You know, because there's plenty of these nice little props of like tanks, pallets of all types of stuff, and these dumpsters there, and containers as well. You know, something I don't get to do normally, or at all, I should say, building in 1929 Berlin. But still, even though it's, you know, more modern than 1929, 1986, it's certainly by no means modern. So there's still a lot of props on the workshop that are from the 80s, but they didn't look like, especially the cars. There's a lot of vehicles and cars that just, I don't know, they're not the best models. I was trying to go for the more European and Russian ones, since, I mean, Russian vehicles from the 80s have a very distinct look, because, I mean, you see them all the time now in Russia as well. But yeah, a lot of those vehicles just didn't look too good, so I had to use a couple different ones that aren't entirely from the 80s maybe, or aren't from Russia even, or Europe. But fortunately, there's still a couple vehicles from like the 60s and 70s that I use, because of course, you know, in the 80s, not everyone's going to have a brand new car, so there's going to be plenty of cars from the, you know, maybe 50s, but of course more in the 60s and 70s driving around. But there I just use a vanilla, I don't know, some park or monument for like workers or something. So I figured anything with a hammer that looks kind of communist, so I just threw it in front of what would be the administrative building. I'm pretty sure that was the actual main office where workers would drive in that way. And that's where I put the parking lot, and threw down the Soviet flag as well as the Ukrainian flag in the Soviet Union. So I guess I forget the actual long name of what it would be called, but just the Ukraine flag when it was part of the Soviet Union. But anyways, some more detailing with the grass. I'm using those tufts. I think they're actually props, they're not trees. I'm using those a lot, which, I don't know, like, sometimes I like them a lot and sometimes I don't, because like when you're up close and you're, you know, for a cinematic shot or a picture, they definitely look pretty cool. They, you know, because up close they have a really good model, but as you zoom out, I mean, not that the LOD is bad, it's just that the little tufts are so small, they just kind of look weird from a distance at times, especially for the smaller ones. Like the larger tufts look pretty good, but also for the larger tufts, it uses like the actual prop is much larger, so I can't squeeze it in these small areas like this. So I'm stuck using the smaller ones. But yeah, like I said, I like it, but I also don't sometimes. But and I don't use them too often in my other series, Berlin Noir. But that's also probably more just because it does give it more of an overgrown look to it. So nothing like manicured as I guess stuff would more be so nicer in Berlin back in 1929 in the city. But yeah, for this it looks a little better. But anyways, so here's another instance where like that truck there is European in style, yes, but it's more modern for sure. I did download a older, I don't think it was quite Soviet, I think it was in like the 2000s, so I guess Russian truck, but the model again just, I don't know, didn't look that good. So I just decided to go with the more modern European truck there. And then the flatbed on the back is actually an American thing, which it does kind of look a little big, to be honest. But again, I basically have to use these props because the ones from back then that are styled as Russian or Soviet just look kind of just look a little funky at times. But anyways, I do have a lot of cool train props, which is another thing when building, you know, my other series. There's like almost no props on the workshop for building in like the 1920s, for trains I should say, for train props. So it's unfortunate because I have to keep repeating the same ones with that. But for in this instance, building in the 80s, you know, stuff looks a lot more similar now as it did back in the 80s, so I can use a little more modern looking stuff. And I actually found like I guess modular you would call it, but a modular like train prop pack. So basically it gives you the flatbeds and some other type of, you know, train cars, and then it gives you also like dirt and those little like coiled wired coil things and wood, just so you can basically make your own train cars, so they're not all the same. You can put different props in different ones, leave some empty, whatever you want to do. But anyways, moving on from that, just using these little curbs, which I totally forgot existed. They definitely add a nice touch to building roads that aren't, you know, like these that are flat on the surface compared to the standard roads that are sunken down, so they can make room for the, you know, the curb and the sidewalk on the side. But for the roads that are perfectly flat on the surface, it is nice to use these curbs because it just adds like a little more dimension to the road and makes it look a little more realistic. Something easy and small to do. But here's another administrative building. For this one, as well as another building that's for administrations, I think it's a Soviet or Russian school, and I don't know, I think it looks like an administrative building. Pretty plain, just looks like kind of like an office. It's got that small courtyard in the middle, which I guess it makes it look more like a school, I suppose. But either way, I think it looks kind of like a building for, you know, I guess any sort of administrative building. But yeah, so we're getting, let's see, 22 minutes in, so a few minutes left. Placing more flags, of course. That's one thing definitely I'm going to be doing a lot, placing a ton of flags. I mean, Soviet Union, I'm sure back then there was flags all over the place of the Soviet Union, as well as Soviet Republic of Ukraine. But yeah, so here again, just using the sand texture, which you can see a little more of the muddy texture poking through, which I like to use that, so it looks really good along like in the cooling pond, which you won't see in the build. There's one shot in the cinematics, which is actually the very first cinematic shot. You'll see a bit of the texture in the cooling pond and everything. It looks really good, I must say. The theme really makes it, because without the details in the theme for the sand and the oil and the ore, it just doesn't, you know, it's all right, you know, it's just a big open pond, but the details really make it. So I'll have to, you know, I'll probably throw up a little card or little writing here or in the comments, whatever, because it's a really cool theme, like I said, so I gotta give the guy props. I gotta find out what the name is and mention it somewhere in the video. But yeah, so yeah, there's not too much left in the video. Just at this point when I was building, I was kind of struggling what exactly to do, because again, like, this is moving away from the main area of the plant. We're getting to more of the boundary where the fence would go around and stuff. But there was just small buildings, which I didn't really have any. Like this right here I'm using as a vanilla building, because I didn't install too many, you know, nuclear plant buildings. I downloaded I forget the name as well, but basically the main nuclear power plant pack on the workshop that has the really big cooling towers and everything. But that comes with a couple buildings that are, I guess, separate from like what you would include in the actual power plant. But yeah, again, I didn't have too many, so I had to resort to some vanilla buildings, which honestly, there's a decent amount of vanilla buildings which are more than okay. There's also plenty of vanilla buildings that don't look okay, but you just, of course, got to find the ones that look good, and that's easy enough to do, just scrolling through. But there's another administrative building. Again, I'm using another school just because, I don't know, to me it looks like an administrative building. I don't know why. Just throwing more flags out in front. Just little circular pushes around there. I think it looks cool. But anyways, so we are pretty much at the end of the episode. I hope you all enjoyed this episode and you're all looking forward to seeing me take on building Pripyat as it was in 1986 for the next couple episodes. If there's anything in particular you want me to see, you want me to build in the city of Pripyat, let me know. I'm definitely going to build more iconic locations like the Ferris wheel and the swimming pool. I mean, I'm sure most of you, but at least for me, when I think of Pripyat, I think of the Ferris wheel and the swimming pool. But yeah, there's obviously a lot more to the city because it was a very large city and it was full of, thousands of people, families, young and old. And, it's completely gone and abandoned now. So, I want to try and see what it was like back, in 1986. So that's going to be it for the episode. As I said, just some last minute detailing here, but I think I'm just going to leave you with a few seconds of some generic 80s pop because I do love my 80s pop. But anyways, yeah, I will see you all next week.